Thank you all so much for coming out to join us today. I'm here with my House partner, Congresswoman Slotkin from Michigan, and we will once again reintroduce the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act. We are here today because we are tired of tragedy, because we want to save lives. This important legislation will help us do that by ensuring that there is funding at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on firearm safety and gun violence prevention. We know this is not a panacea, but it's a piece of the puzzle that for 20 years was barred because knowledge is power, and for too long the NRA and their acolytes in the United States House and Senate wanted to take the power away from the people. No one knows this better than the gun violence researchers and advocates who are here with us today, including Shannon Fraser from the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions and Greg Jackson from the Community Justice Organization, who will tell you just how critical funding for gun violence prevention research is in their life-saving work. Today, we're also welcoming to the Capitol students who have experienced firsthand the horrors of the gun violence epidemic that plagues our communities from our schools to our streets. Devin Woodruff, a Michigan State University student. Dylan Morris, an Oxford High School student. Elia Eastman, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting survivor and co-founder of Team Enough, as well as March for Our Lives advocate and American University student Anam Hassan. So far in 2023, Americans have witnessed and experienced the carnage of more than 130 mass shootings. Just this week, another mass shooting in Tennessee took the lives of 3 innocent 9-year-old girls and 3 adults. How many more lives must be lost before Congress is moved to act? How many more families must be torn apart? How many more communities must be shattered by the trauma of gun violence? We need a federal assault weapons ban now. We need universal background checks now. We need red flag laws nationwide now. We need to hold gun manufacturers accountable for their deadly products now. We need to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people now. And we need to invest in the research to guide evidence-backed, data-driven solutions that will help save lives. But for more than 20 years, a rider to the 1996 Omnibus Appropriations Bill, the Dickey Amendment, blocked the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, our nation's top public health research agency, from conducting gun research, from conducting prevention research in our country. Putting blinders on our best researchers and avoiding the science that could help us stop gun violence never made any sense in the first place. For years, with the support of gun safety advocates, I have led the fight against this deadly self-imposed ignorance. In 2020, our perseverance finally paid off. Beginning in fiscal year 2020 through fiscal year 2023, we secured $100 million in gun violence prevention research funding at the Centers for Disease Control. But we shouldn't have to wage an appropriations battle every single year. In order to most effectively respond to our nation's gun violence epidemic and fill the data gaps caused by decades of inaction, we must authorize, increase, and regularize gun violence prevention research funding. With the limited money we've secured, since 2020, the CDC has funded research to enhance our understanding of firearms injuries, develop innovative prevention strategies, and evaluate the efficacy of strategies to safeguard individuals, families, schools, and communities from firearm-related harm. Whether it is studying how to best implement extreme risk protection order laws or how to prevent firearm suicides. We must invest in this research because by doing that, we will gain a better understanding of the root causes of gun violence and identify evidence-based solutions in order to prevent it. With the right funding, research at the CDC, we can help to bring an end to the epidemic of gun violence in the United States, a crisis that affects all Americans, regardless of age, race, or political affiliation. Our communities barely have a moment to mourn before gun violence takes the lives of more Americans. More children, more parents, more brothers, sisters, friends, mentors. These are statistics. These are people. It is time for us to act. For every single city and town across the country suffering from gun violence today, we must now work even harder. We put a assault weapons ban in place in 1994. It expired in 2004. By 1996, they were back again, the NRA, to put a ban on research. We now are doing that research, and we need more funding. So that's why we are here today, and that's why I am just so proud to be able to partner with the great Congresswoman from the state of Michigan, Congresswoman Slotkin. Welcome.
Well, it's an honor to be here with Senator Markey, who has been an incredible advocate on this issue for quite a long time. I want to talk a little bit about, as I stand here with all these advocates, about our experience in the state of Michigan. Just over a month ago, I became the first Congresswoman in America to have 2 school shootings in her district. And what's particularly devastating is that these tragedies were 16 months apart. In November of 2021, a deeply troubled high school student opened fire with his parents' gun at Oxford High School and killed 4 of his fellow students. Last month, on February 13th, a gunman walked through the campus of Michigan State University, terrorizing students, putting all of East Lansing on lockdown, forcing a manhunt, and murdering 3 young Michiganders, wounding 5 others before killing himself. And on Monday, another mass shooting at an elementary school in Nashville, resulting in 6 deaths, including 3 9-year-olds. Gun violence is now the leading cause of death for people under 21. That's not politics, that is just fact. And while the news will move on from each shooting, take it from me, our kids and our families who are first forced to endure pain and trauma, that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. I've seen it firsthand at vigils and funerals, community meetings with students and teachers and first responders, the need for long-term counseling, and the fear of public places. That emotional weight from these tragedies is crushing. What we have in front of us is a choice. Do we, as adults, want to step up and do something to fight the biggest threat to our children? Or are we, at this point, willing to ignore the greatest threat to our kids? To make this point, we're joined here today by 2 students from my district, Dylan Morris, one of the students from Oxford High School, who was there at the day of the shooting, and Devin Woodruff, a student at Michigan State who was on campus and in the student union the night of the shooting at MSU's campus. Both of them are here today. I'm so grateful for them and their bravery in speaking up and choosing to help lead the way in addressing this crisis. They are turning their pain into purpose, and I'm immensely proud of them. As a former CIA officer and Pentagon official, I want to be clear that preventing gun violence is a matter of Homeland Security. The job of anyone in Homeland Security is to protect U.S. citizens in the homeland, and the bill we're here to unveil today is part and parcel of protecting American citizens. Quite simply, the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act would help give the CDC the tools they need to study the root causes of gun violence and help shine a light on the steps we can take to make our communities safer. As a Michigander, I'm particularly proud that one of the academic institutions that does this very kind of critical research is the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention at the University of Michigan. Now, the U.S. government has long studied and gone after the killers of children. The most clear comparison I can make today is on seatbelts and car seats in the 1970s and 1980s. Back then, the #1 killer of young children was car accidents. No seatbelts, no car seats. The CDC studied why. Why were so many children losing their lives in these car accidents? And the studies were fundamental to a U.S. physician-led push to mandate car seats and eventually seatbelts. With the help of that data from the CDC, we decided to go after the #1 threat to kids. And what we are announcing today is the very same thing. Our children are being traumatized and killed in their sanctuaries. And as you will hear, they are asking for our help. As elected officials who have sworn an oath to protect and defend the United States, I can think of no higher responsibility than to protect our children. This should not be a partisan or divisive issue. It is the job description of a U.S. representative. And while certain members of Congress here in D.C. have not yet gotten the memo, the ground is shifting on this issue. And Americans of all stripes, including and especially gun owners, hunters, sportsmen, are demanding basic gun safety measures that will help save the lives of their children. In Michigan, our state legislature is listening to the demands of the public for basic safety measures like universal background checks, safe storage laws, and extreme risk protection orders. We are poised to pass this monumental legislation in the next couple of months. The 2 school shootings we've had make it clear that there is no contradiction between being a responsible gun owner and caring deeply about protecting children. Lastly, to my colleagues who refuse to consider any gun safety legislation, if you're so sure that other gun safety legislation, that any gun safety legislation is bad, you should at least be willing to study the problem and get the data you say you need to do something to protect our kids. Thank you again to Senator Markey, to our activists who've put in their sweat and their time to this issue. And I'll now hand it over to our Michigan State student, Devin.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Devin Woodruff. I am a proud student at Michigan State University. I'm glad to be here with you all today and to focus on keeping students safe. I spent a lot of time at the MSU Union. I call the MSU Union my home. At that time, that was when a gunman opened fire, and at the end of the night, 3 of my fellow students had been killed. My night, it turned upside down. I ended up that night crying, not knowing what I was gonna do that whole night. Ended up calling my mother, telling her I didn't know how I was gonna move next. My home that I call the Union was effectively ruined by a gunman. The Union would never feel the same. It would never be the same. I wish that these tragedies happen less frequently, but as the news of Nashville on Monday showed, this is becoming more of a normalized part of life in the United States. And it's kids and students like me who are paying the price of the inaction of DC politicians who are, frankly, in my opinion, scamming us. More than a month after the shooting in MSU, we at MSU were struggling. Students are struggling. We don't know how to feel safe on campus. Even with the wounds that we're healing, Spartans' families will never be the same. I use a saying that my mother always says is that kids should always come back home, and that can't be said for the Spartans' lives that were lost. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for kids in America, and until we start treating this like a public health crisis, kids aren't going to feel safe in their communities and in their school. We can't settle for thoughts and prayers anymore. We need concrete action to help save lives, including bills that are talked about here today. Studying gun violence as a public health crisis is the best possible way to understand the root cause of this epidemic and how we can combat it. The Gun Violence Prevention Research Act will boost the CDC's research into gun safety and give us new strategies that will stop mass shooting. This kind of bill shouldn't be partisan. It shouldn't be partisan at all. We need to make sure that we are keeping students and everyone safe. I really want to make sure that we move upon the front that everyone's life matters, and we need Congress to act now. But I sincerely want to thank Congresswoman Slotkin and Senator Markey for advocating for students because they're truly doing their job, unlike some of the people in these congressional chambers who are just collecting a check and not actually doing action and wanting to save our lives. But I thank you, Congresswoman Slotkin, for actually doing the work and wanting to make sure that students are able to go to school, get an education, and live. Thank you.
Dylan Morris from Oxford High School.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Congresswoman Slotkin for having me here today. My name is Dylan Morris, and I am a student impacted by senseless gun violence. I'm a senior at Oxford High School in Oxford, Michigan, and the executive director of No Future Without Today, a 501c4 social welfare initiative to curb gun violence. On Tuesday, November 30, 2021, a student fired an unsecured handgun he had brought from home in the hallway at school during a passing time. He murdered Hannah St. Juliana, Tate Meir, Justin Schilling, and Madison Baldwin, and wounded 7 others. That afternoon, I huddled in the corner of my English classroom. We were to begin reading a short story by Haruki Murakami, but instead, we were ready to defend ourselves if anyone came through our door. My classmates and I frantically grabbed makeshift weapons, including scissors, tape dispensers, and a hockey stick, anything we could find at the moment. Is this America's idea of freedom? It's not mine. It shouldn't have been a school day for my classmates and me. It should not have been a school day for those students and educators in Nashville either. 3 children, 3 young children, and 3 adults were murdered at an elementary school on Monday. Many more were traumatized, and a community is now left shattered. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for children and teens in the United States. We need to move beyond thoughts and prayers and take bold action. We know that we need a universal background checks law, a national safe storage law, and a renewed assault weapons ban. But we also need research to finally address this as the public health crisis that it is. For decades, the lack of federal investment in research and data collection on gun violence, despite its increasing prevalence, has been failing communities around this nation. And as a high school student, I'm taught to use data and research to back up my arguments, but the federal government has made it impossible for states, community organizations, and researchers to adequately tackle this problem. The contents of the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act will help us create evidence-based solutions to this epidemic and save thousands of lives every year. And I ask the people in the building behind me who may not fully grasp the reality of what we're dealing with here to picture their lives without their children, picture their lives without their loved ones, their spouse, picture their faces on the news. Nobody is immune to the effects of gun violence anymore. I now personally know students and young people in Michigan who have survived 2 mass shootings. It's no longer a matter of if you'll experience the effects of gun violence, it's a matter of when. It's no longer, it's not permissible, it's not okay. And I'm grateful for Representative Slotkin and Senator Markey for leading this effort, and I urge members of Congress from both parties to help get this bill over the finish line so that we can start to treat this crisis with the seriousness that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Elia.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Elia Eastman, and I'm an organizer and co-founder of Team Enough, and a current senior at Trinity Washington University. At the age of 22, I have been having this conversation over and over and over. Since the age of 16, I have been forced to relive my trauma nearly every day due to the inaction of this country. I'm talking about the senseless but preventable gun violence in America. I survived the 2018 Valentine's Day tragedy at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, where 14 of my schoolmates and 3 administrators were killed. I was in the 3rd classroom attacked by the perpetrator, and I'm only here today because of Nicholas Doret, who in death protected me from bullets as they shattered our classroom laptops, windows, and walls. Faster than 4 minutes, 17 beautiful angels were robbed from our community, and another 17 more are left with the physical scars from that day for the rest of their lives. 34 people were shot in total, and that does not include the emotional and psychological damage gun violence leaves behind that we are all forced to clean up ourselves. But Parkland is just one of over 300 fatal school shootings since Columbine. And it's not just schools. We see this violence at churches, malls, parades, grocery stores, and every single day in our streets. This year alone, there has been exceedingly more mass shootings than days. In the month of March, we have experienced over 57 fatalities, and it's only been 29 days of this month so far. We know that this violence is not inevitable and that there are common sense, public-supported solutions. And that's why I'm here, proud to support Senator Markey and Representative Slotkin for the reintroduction of the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act. This bill would fund research at the CDC on firearms safety and gun violence prevention legislation. It is a critical step in understanding the root causes of gun violence and developing effective solutions to prevent it. We cannot ignore the recent tragedies that have taken place in this country. 2 days ago, just 2 days ago, we witnessed yet another devastating mass shooting at an elementary school. An elementary school in Nashville, Tennessee, where at least 3 children and 3 adults lost their lives. 3 children lost their lives. Evelyn Dykenhaus, Haley Scruggs, William Kenny, all at the age of 9 years old, in the place that they're supposed to feel the safest. Children are fighting wars in their classrooms with no protection. We have states like Florida that don't even want to arm us with books and knowledge. They are busy rejecting things like critical race theory instead of protecting children from shootings. The new purpose of school in America is death and trauma. Meanwhile, dangerous legislation is still being pushed through Tennessee and Florida, expanding permitless open carry for all firearms, including assault-style weapons. We know that that will not keep us safe. We cannot allow these reckless and stupid policies to continue. And we can't continue to let our leaders fail us. They failed those 3 9-year-old children. They are failing us. Failing children that are trying to learn. Innocent people are being slaughtered by weapons of war, and this country continues to do nothing about it. If our leaders cannot prioritize public safety and invest in research that will keep us safe from future tragedies, then they do not deserve a job. Vote them out. Thank you for joining us in supporting the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act. And let's work together to change the course and culture of gun violence in America. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Greg Jackson, Executive Director of Community Justice Action Fund.
First and foremost, thank you to the members of Congress for having us here today. My name is Greg Jackson. I'm the Executive Director for the Community Justice Action Fund. And I don't come here by choice. I come here by circumstance. In April of 2013, only 9 blocks away from here, I was shot. And the bullet that hit me hit 2 arteries. And while I was bleeding to death, being transported to the hospital, when I arrived at the hospital, I wasn't met with activists and survivors and supporters. I wasn't met with my doctors or nurses. I was met with investigators. And I went through 3 rounds of investigation while I was fighting for my life, literally bleeding to death. When I finally met my surgeon, he said I only had 26 minutes left to live. And I almost lost my life while being investigated for a crime. And in America, we are in a world where we are thinking about solving the crime first and saving the life second. And that crime-only approach is destroying our communities. Gun violence is a public health crisis that requires a public health approach. Since I was shot, 100,000 people have been shot every single year. That means nearly 1 million individuals have been shot. And these are more than numbers. For me, this includes my family friend Trey, who was shot and killed in Greensboro, North Carolina, my mentee Karan, who was shot and killed 2 weeks after hosting his own Stop the Violence rally here in Southeast DC, and so many countless others. Gun violence has become the #1 cause of premature death for all youth in America, but it's been the #1 cause of premature death for black youth since 2006. This is the #1 cause of premature death for all black men in America. #2 cause of premature death for black women and for Latino men in America. But yet we haven't seen the action that we need. We have not seen the solutions that we want, and we have not seen the investments that we need in our communities to address this crisis. Research is key because it allows us to figure out what we do not know. But there's a lot we already know. One thing that we know is that this is the least researched cause of death in America of the top 30 causes of death. The least research. There's more research around sepsis. Y'all probably have to look that up, right? There's more research on that than there is on gun violence as a public health crisis. And we know that research equals solutions. We also know that there are evidence-based strategies that don't have enough federal support to be passed. Programs like community violence intervention programs, hospital-based services, victim services, cognitive behavioral therapy programs, so many strategies that are very cost-efficient that if properly invested and supported in could save lives today, but don't have the enough research backing to get the support needed in Congress. We also know that gun violence has a real cost. Every year, we're losing over $557 billion from our economy due to the impact of gun violence. That's a very high price tag. And often you'll hear leaders say, well, we don't have the money for it. Or like yesterday, we can't fix it. But if you knew that you could save $557 billion, I think there would be a little bit more energy in Congress to get something done. There's a couple things that I really want to emphasize is that we have the solutions in our hands, but we don't have enough research or activism or urgency in Congress in order for us to get this done. And so I want to thank these Congress folks for stepping up, Senator Markey, Congresswoman Slotkin, for investing in research and pushing forward and giving us the solutions and the background that we need to advance the solutions that we know save lives. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Shannon Fraser, a researcher at Johns Hopkins University.
Good afternoon, everyone. Senator Markey, thank you for having me here. Congresswoman Slotkin, thank you very much. I'm humbled to be here with this group today whose high school and college years have been punctuated by gun death and who have responded with such courage and determination. My name is Shannon Fraser. I'm a professor at the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions, where for more than 20 years I've used public health tools to develop, implement, and evaluate strategies designed to prevent gun violence. Up until recently, federal funding to support this type of work was almost non-existent. Efforts to identify solutions were limited to a small community of researchers supported by a dedicated group of private funders who were, quite frankly, outmatched by the sheer size and scope of gun violence in this country. Over the past 20 years, while federal funding has been out of the picture, more than 650,000 people have been killed by guns in the United States. They've died by suicide, they've died by homicide, including intimate partner homicides, and by unintended gunfire in communities all across this country. Many more survived being shot, but sustained life-altering injuries and untold trauma. Even more have lost loved ones to gun violence. Over the past 20 years, as the number of lives lost to gun violence has increased, I have watched year after year as talented early career researchers rise to meet the challenge that is gun violence prevention, only to turn away as they realize that without federal support for this work, the chance to make a meaningful impact is almost impossible. The absence of federal support for gun violence prevention research means that for decades, we as a country have missed opportunity after opportunity to understand the full scope of the problem and to study, refine, and implement informed solutions that could have saved countless lives. But times are changing. In the years since Congress began to support gun violence prevention research, missed opportunities are being replaced with funded research designed to make a difference. Both NIH and CDC have funded research projects that are up and running today. I know this because I'm the recipient of one such grant. And I know that the findings from this newly funded research will provide guidance to communities, local governments, state and federal agencies, and other service providers about how to reverse the upward trend in gun violence that has increased at an alarming rate since the pandemic began. To meet the challenge that is gun violence in the United States, we must continue to invest federal research dollars in order to make up for an entire lost generation of gun violence prevention research. Those investments need to continue if we are going to realize a future where high school and college students come to the nation's capital to celebrate their accomplishments and participate in democracy rather than mourn their classmates and loved ones and heal their traumas. I'm here to assure you that the gun violence research prevention community and the larger community of public health researchers are already rising to the challenge to identify solutions to our country's gun violence problem. Continued congressional support for that work is an essential step, and I thank you for your efforts to realize that goal.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Anam Hassan. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Anam Hassan. I'm a student at American University, and I'm here today speaking on behalf of March for Our Lives. Firearms are the leading cause of death for children and teens in the United States. For students like myself, that means we have to live constantly in the shadow of America's gun violence epidemic. Often we are told by passive elected officials who aren't interested in saving lives that gun violence prevention policies do not work, even though they have been proven to save lives both abroad and in the U.S. This lack of initiative from elected officials is why there has been a complete underinvestment in research and data that surrounds gun violence in our country. Without up-to-date data on gun violence, apathetic officials can pretend gun violence is not our reality and they are helpless to solve this issue. That is why I am so grateful today to be here with real leaders and partners in this movement, Senator Edward J. Markey and Congresswoman Caroline B. Maloney, as they reintroduce the Gun Violence Prevention Research Act to fund research at the CDC on firearm safety and gun violence prevention. Funding for gun violence research is critical for our fight to end gun violence. Today's the 88th day of the year, and our country's already been through 129 mass shootings. The headlines from this past week read, Chicago shootings, 12 shot, 2 fatally, and weakened gun violence across city. Another reads, how to talk to children about school shootings after 6 people were killed in the Nashville shooting. 2 children orphaned by gun violence in Louisville over the weekend. And this is only to name a few. This is the United States' current reality, but it doesn't have to be this way. CDC research on gun violence prevention will help us build out evidence-based solutions, and it's one tool in our fight to end gun violence in the U.S. and change our nation's reality. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Senator Markey had to run and vote. He's on his way back, but we're happy to take questions from the press for any of our speakers who are up here today. Thanks for coming.
Why do you think a public health approach is the right approach to take with gun violence?
Well, first of all, I mean, as you've heard, when something is the #1 killer of young people under 21, I think it deserves to be researched and understood in a scientific way, and particularly to get at the root causes. But secondly, I think the public health part of it is obvious when you see, particularly in urban settings, the way that you'll have 1 person shot and then 3 people shot and then 5 people shot. It's similar to a public health risk that you might see coming from disease or illness. Particularly in communities that have long dealt with gun violence, there's a pattern to some of these things, particularly in retributive violence. So I think that there's an obvious connection to science and to understanding that is an issue, because if my peers are constantly saying well, this piece of legislation isn't going to work, or this piece of legislation isn't going to get at it. Well, if they're so convinced that not one single bill of the hundreds that have been produced are actually going to do anything, then at least allow us to study it and have some data, if that's a true argument that they're making. So I think it's clear, and as you heard, that was a new fact for me, that it's out of the top 30 ways that Americans die, it's the least researched. I thought that was a stat that speaks for itself. Yeah. What else? Oh, sure. Good clap. Thank you. Yes, sir.
What's the message to Congressmen like Tim Burchett, who said we're not going to do anything to stop school shootings?
It's not hard to understand when the #1 killer of children under 21 is gun violence, and legislators who are elected refuse to talk about gun violence. That's not a hard equation to understand. That means that they are so scared of their base, they are so scared of being primaried from their right, they are so scared of losing the privileges of this job that they would rather ignore it, wait for the cameras to go away, and live another day than do something to protect children. And as someone who, just like these guys, swore an oath to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution, it is at this point, for me, dereliction of duty for these folks to refuse. And I'm not saying we have to agree on every single bill. That's not what this place is about. This place is about debate and negotiation and compromise. But they refuse to come to the table. They refuse to offer their own ideas. They refuse to acknowledge the base problem. So I'm a Democrat who represents a Republican-leaning district. That is, I grew up with guns. I feel, we have a ton of folks who believe passionately about the Second Amendment, but that does not mean that responsible gun owners don't also want to protect their babies in schools and in their communities. Yeah. What else?
Have you spoken to any Republicans about this research bill? Do you have any reason to believe they would be on board with it?
Last Congress, we had a number of very brave Republicans who did vote on a lot of legislation on appropriations related to gun violence. From my own state of Michigan, we had Fred Upton, who is retired. Unfortunately, many of those brave Republicans aren't back in Congress. So the people that we always went to, who were sort of the leading edge on bipartisanship on this issue, have either been primaried and are not here, or they've chosen to retire rather than be in a climate that's this polarized. We have constantly reached out to our Republican colleagues, begged them to come to the table on something as simple as universal background checks, right? You're going to buy a weapon, go through a background check. You say you care about mental health and you think that's the problem? Great, let's do a background check for people who buy guns on the internet, who buy guns at a gun show. But their resistance is to every single bill. And that, to me, tells me they're not serious. They're not ready for a real conversation. They're just here to enjoy the privileges of this place and not do their job and protect young people. Yeah. Anything else for our speakers? Well, I know Senator Markey's probably hustling to get back here as fast as he can. I don't want to hold people. You see? Oh, you see him. Okay. Well, we'll all stare at him awkwardly as he walks across the plaza. He's doing his duty. He's doing his job to vote, and we'll see if there's any questions for the senator. Well, let me ask the other organizations here to come up and speak and talk about how to get involved.
All right. Hey, so first things first, if you want to get involved with Community Justice Action Fund, you can follow us at CJ Action Fund, www.cjactionfund.org, We also have a really important research project called the City Violence Prevention Index Report, where we looked at the top 50 cities most impacted by violence and assessed what are they investing in to address violence beyond policing. And we're seeing that a lot of cities are not investing in trauma centers and trauma care. They're not investing in access to resources. They're not implementing anti-bullying policy. So we encourage you to look at that report to learn more about the strategies and what we're trying to build on with this research.
For any young people that are interested in getting involved, you can go to www.teamenough.org. And for any older parents or grandparents that want to get involved, you can go to www.bradyunited.org.
Beautiful.
So, Senator, we've gone through a few questions, but I'm sure they have questions for you as well.
Any questions? Okay, Yes, sir.
The Congresswoman was asked if she had had any conversations with her House colleagues around this particular piece of legislation. I'm curious if you've talked to any of your Republican Senate colleagues about pushing something like this forward to see if there's a possibility that this could advance during this.
Well, in past years, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney and I, we had to work the appropriations process, which is what Congresswoman Slotkin and I are now going to do. And we're going to work it throughout the course of the year as it unfolds. We've been successful the last couple of Congresses, and our goal is to ensure that we do it once again. We want $50 million a year for 5 years in a row. Research is medicine's field of dreams from which we harvest the findings that give the information we need in order to prevent the unnecessary death that is occurring in our country right now. And we're very optimistic that we will be successful once again. And Congresswoman Slotkin is a hero in the House, and she has an incredible story to tell from her home state. But there are many other stories from every other state, and we intend on capitalizing upon that politically to get the funding which is going to be necessary. Because research without funding is an hallucination. So we have to get that funding made available. Thank you all so much. Thanks for being here. Thank you. Wow.
Great job. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
I'm Catherine CDI Roundtable. I'm Catherine.